whatever towards the faith, but I've like always had feelings and inclinations towards the faith. So it's foreign to me when people say that they never had a personal experience with God at any moment in their 20, 30 years. I don't even think I don't know if it takes that. I don't know.
So have you had a personal experience with God?
Absolutely,
What
several.
Well, I've had feelings, right? When I was Job's Witness, I had feelings towards the faith. But you have to understand that you have to distinguish between the feeling that you're getting something from God and if you're actually getting something from God. And then I determined that basically, actually scientifically, actually I determined that that actually really wasn't the case. It was more likely that it was a feeling I was getting from being in a community rather than it actually coming from a divine source.
And how did you determine that scientifically?
Well, in psychology, basically, humans, since we tend to be a social species, we tend to unite over things, and religion happens to be one of those things that makes us feel really good because of the combination of music, a combination of making yourself mean more, and and a community that has moral value. And as a social species, we like communities that have that, and stuff like that. And I think it has to do more with how has to do more with pheromones and feelings rather than divinity. Because we can point to every single religion, Hinduism, Islam, Buddhism, Christianity, and they all claim to have these feelings. And I don't think Christianity has an edge over any single one of them when it comes to a sense of community or involvement or something coming from God. I think every religion claims that. I think it all can be driven back to animism,
All right, so
primitive belief.
basically, you got persuaded by an alternate explanation, not necessarily a debunking of the Christian faith.
Yeah, exactly. That's how I'll put it. I never claimed that I never claimed that when I used that induction or inference that it falsified the Christian God or falsified
No,
religion.
no, yeah,
I
I
just
know
said that
that. Yeah, I know that.
it just made me believe it just made me believe that this probably the scientific route is probably the most probable explanation since we have more experience with than experience with a God.
What about, have you never had a supernatural experience? And when I say
Never.
supernatural, all right. So, did you see the debate between Mike Licona and Matt Dillon?
Michael Cohen. Yes, I have. I have seen
You,
that debate,
you
and that's
remember
where he
when he
talks
talked?
about.
Go
Go
ahead.
ahead. Yeah, that's where he talks about how this. He talks about this woman who was in the hospital bed had the supernatural experience of her son or something like that, and
Um,
she saw. Was that the one?
I, I'm, I think that was in there, but I was looking more so toward when he said that his father would go evangelizing, and when his father did, weird and freaky stuff would happen inside the house that he and his sister witnessed.
Oh, I see. Okay,
The, where he said a
I don't
towel.
remember. I don't remember that one,
Well,
but I do
basically, he
remember
said a
him mentioning
towel
some
stood
super.
on end.
He said the towel stood on end.
Yeah, towel stood
Well,
on end, and a garbage can lid flew against the wall. It stuck to the wall, and it slowly um, came, fell down the wall, slowly dragged down the wall, or however you want.
I mean, people claim supernatural experience, and like, I don't think that's, I don't unnecessarily think that's a persuasive argument to say that there exists a God because there could be so many different explanations, right, that could account for that. Especially since all religions claim to have some similar supernatural experience to what you're describing. When I was a Jehovah's Witness, this is pretty much based on Jehovah's Witness faith. Every single Jehovah's Witness you're going to run across, because basically demons are a huge thing that Jehovah's Witnesses talk about. And each one of them, or a lot of them, will have like a demon experience, right? Including my dad. My dad has had experiences where with Ouija boards and stuff like that. when he was a kid, or stories where they tried to set Ouija boards on fire and the Ouija board wouldn't light. They've also done stuff where Ouija boards have been in people's house and people in pictures started growing older in the picture, right? So I think everyone has, how should I put it? I know that sounds weird the way I put it. When I mean people in the picture got older, basically what he's saying is that the people in the picture, when they originally took the picture, were young. But since that Ouija board was in
No,
the
I get
house,
it.
the people, yeah. So, I mean, there's tons of claims regarding this. If you look at Hinduism, they have this belief or these supernatural experiences they think when I think they see Vishnu or something like that, or a form of resemblance of them when they do this type of ceremony or something like that. I mean, of I mean, spiritual experiences that people have, but I don't think that's necessarily persuasive towards there being a God. That's there could be a plethora of either natural explanations or just other explanations that are beyond our understanding that could be the result of that.
But you don't have any
So I don't,
natural explanations, right?
Well, there are a few natural explanations, right? We know that humans tend to, when humans experience things, humans tend, the brain is really tricky. And the brain, even if you're not high or anything, the brain will do things to objects that aren't necessarily there. And they'll make it seem like it was as real as possible. I remember when I was a kid, I guess I don't think this was a supernatural experience or anything like that, but I remember I was in my room at the time playing, and I saw this really scary monkey-looking thing standing by the wall, right? And I remember I ran out and I told my mom about it. And then when I went back, it wasn't there. But I knew for sure that that thing was there. And I don't think there's necessarily, I don't think that had anything to do with demons or whether or not it can be placed as a supernatural experience. Especially since even my mom believing in all that type of stuff, my mom even told me that that probably was just me imagining something or because I watched something, my mind put it there. And so I think the brain, like, looks at things and looks at images and looks at objects. And then when it becomes familiar with the world around it, it will start, depending on how your mind reacts to what you just saw, it may put it there, or it may do something which may lead you to believe that it was supernatural. But I don't think, well, I guess I should just cut to the point. I don't think I have I don't think God has any testable prediction. The God hypothesis essentially has any prediction that it can give off that can lead us or show us whether or not any supernatural event or any event can be linked back or be considered evidence for his existence or the hypothesis itself.
Yeah,
Because
you
I
got
don't
the
have
Bible.
access. What do you mean?
The Bible, God made predictions. They came true. And that's why it's the powerful force that it is today.
What prediction does the Bible make?
That Jesus will be killed and resurrected.
Do you know that the Gospels were written 30 years after Jesus was killed on the cross?
Are you sure they were written 30 years after, or is that the earliest?
30
Um,
years, 30
is that
years minimum, according to
no,
scholars. 30 years may not even be accurate. That's just the
no?
minimum. Yeah.
Yeah. So we don't exactly. You just said yes. So is it the fact that there was no writings during his lifetime, or was it this is the only documents that we're able to find?
It's the fact that there were no writings found during his time,
You
and
just
that all
said
the writings
guess.
we have of no, I said it's no. I said it's no. What I said a guess by, and this would be, you should understand this. What I mean guess is that the guess that it's a fact that it happened. It happened long after Jesus had died, right? If Jesus existed, right? It happened long
How is it a
after that
fact?
because Matthew was written 30 years after. I can give you
How is that a
sources.
fact
What are you asking?
and not? How is that a fact and not a hypothesis?
Because archaeologists have said it, and historians have said it was a fact, and
I don't think
theologians.
that's the case. I don't think that's the case.
It is a fact that there's no Roman
Listen,
records concerning Jesus at all.
We're not going to distract
yeah,
right now, Andrew, because what we're going to say is regarding the Gospels, you
not
can
even
say,
Christians doubt this. Even Christians admit people who have studied the information, who are theologians, will admit that the Gospels weren't written during that time, and they have tons of apologists or apologetic answers to account for that, right? I'm not saying whether or not they're accurate or
No, but
inaccurate, right?
we're talking about the scientific method, right? The scientific method doesn't prove anything, right? So there's no proof that there was no writings until 30 years after Jesus died. It's just a theory that someone came up with from whatever data they were able to collect. What happens is you are turning that, like you said, guess into a fact, and that's not the case.
I mean, I can give you sources if you want.
But then whatever your sources are, that source
Well,
would
then what
have
is
to
the
travel
earliest
through
writing
time.
concrete?
No, we're not going to distract. We're going to say the Bible made a prediction that Jesus would be martyred and then resurrect. That's what the Bible made a prediction on. So that's God telling you what's going to happen, it
What
happening,
about that? Okay,
and pointing
okay.
back to God being
Wait,
true.
hold on. I want to
Even if I was,
say something quick.
even if I was to grant you, right, that all the theological evidence we have, right, doesn't point to that prediction being man-made, right? So what if we were to say that prediction really did happen in the Bible and that all the stuff was written during that time, right? How does that prediction lead us to the Christian God?
So if Daniel writes a prophecy about Jesus
No.
under
You're
the
not
guidance,
distracting.
I'm not done. Under the guidance of the Holy Spirit or from a dream or from an inclination of God, and then 700 years later that happens, how does that not point back to God?
You got to
The
prove that it
burden of proof
happened
is not on
first.
me.
Okay, so you're just saying you hear my explanation, you just don't agree with it.
Well, I'll give a good example of what they're talking about, concrete. So there are other people.
No, thank you, no,
So
thank
there
you,
are other
Ray.
people. Well, you're not controlling the room like that, so I'll give an example, right? So
Well,
other people.
your example is not
So
helpful
can you just mute him? Well, it is. Well, how do you know I haven't
Yeah,
said it?
concrete, you don't get to
Calm
do
down. You want to be Patrice.
because you're going to interject. You want to
Calm down. Listen,
interject
we
with
understand.
nonsense.
Just can you just let me
And
finish
we
the point? Can someone
Go
mute
ahead,
him?
go ahead, go ahead.
Right. So there are other people that have made predictions. Would you agree or not that have came true?
All right, yeah, you're distracted. This makes
No, I'm not
sense.
distracting at all. No, it is. So what Yuri's saying is, how do we determine between the predictions, right, that are made in the Bible, and let's say predictions that, who's the other one? Nosferatu? No, that's a vampire. Nostradamus. How do we know that those ones are from God and those ones aren't? What's the factor within those predictions that, let's say he grants you those predictions are true, right? What makes you know that they're from God? That
All
has
right,
to lead from God.
okay, I got it. All right, so you have the Bible, right, which is a culmination of multiple works from multiple periods of time, from multiple authors, with the same continuous message, right? Multiple authors who have never met each other speak about the same God in the same way about similar future events. That's how God can establish himself through multiple people, over multiple periods of time with the same singular message about Jesus Christ.
Sorry. Why would that be evidence for God?
I mean, just think about it. If you got a guy in China, a guy in Africa, and a guy in America, right, who never met each other and never lived within the same time period, saying the same thing about one individual in the future, and they all said the same thing about that individual, and what happened to that individual actually happened, and every one of those people attribute their knowledge and their power to God.
That's just an argument from ignorance.
Okay, whatever you want to call it, buddy.
No, it's logically fallacious, right?
Okay.
It's like me saying, I don't know, I don't know how the pond got filled up with water. It hasn't rained here in like a number of years, so we could probably say that's the least likely explanation since it's a desert, right? So therefore, that hole got filled up in the ground because of a magical water-giving spirit.
How
I
is
can't
your
see any. I
analogy
can't see any reason
similar?
why that hole in the desert got filled up with water. Therefore, some genie, water-giving spirit put it there.
Yeah. That doesn't work. Sorry.
What? Wait, sorry. Why doesn't it work? What did
How
I
does
say? But did it
how
make
does
any sense?
anything you said represent three different individuals on three different continents during three different time periods
Well, the
speaking
whole
about
point,
one?
if you were paying
Wait,
attention, if you were
hold
paying
on.
attention,
I'm
right?
still talking, asshole. How does what you just talked about, one pond and a genie, speak about three different periods, three different time, three different people, three different continents, speaking about one singular event in the future that actually happened? How does that equate?
Well, presumably, right, if you were paying attention, and how I took your answer to be regarding the three men, right, is that you don't see any other reason for how the three men could have got this book written out. So therefore, they all claim that a God did it. Therefore, a
No.
God
It's
did
not
it.
that I'm not questioning their source, right? We're just simply stating the fact that this thing happened.
What fact?
That, oh my goodness, three different people from three different continents and three different time periods spoke about one individual in the future.
Right, and how is that evidence for God? That goes back to my original question.
So if all four of those people, the people who spoke about the future, the person that they were speaking about, all said that their power and their information and their duties came from God, how does that not point back to a God?
Because them claiming that a God did it is not any better than me claiming that the genie filled up the water hole in the desert.
Oh, so you don't believe them, but it does point back to a God. It points back to a God, but you just don't believe them. Is that what
No, I'm saying that it's logically fallacious.
you asked me to point to? How does it point to a God? I just told you. Are you saying it
Yeah,
doesn't point to a God when all three of them say they got their information from God?
no, of course not.
So
Nor
they're
does it
lying.
prove
So
that
you're
a
saying that
genie was the one who filled up the
no.
water hole,
So you're
dumbass.
saying they're lying. So you're saying they're lying. Because if they
Uh,
point to God, then guess what? In and of itself, it points to God. If they point to God, then of course it points to God.
Yeah, but you still
So
haven't proven the
what do you?
events happened
No, no,
concrete.
no, 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 no. He asked, how does it point to a God? I said, if they point to a God, it points to a God. Now he's
Yeah,
saying it doesn't point to a God.
if
yeah,
it
what God did?
happened.
Hold on. They pointed to a God. Fact.
Did it happen?
Now, you said, how did they point to a God? It's because they point to a God. So are
Did
you
it
saying they?
happen?
So are you saying it doesn't point to a God, or you don't believe them?
I want to know if it
Well,
actually
I don't.
happened.
Fuck you,
Well,
man. Just let him answer a
look, even
question.
no, look. I don't want to go down. Like I'm granting him, right? I'm trying to reason with him, right? I'm
Okay.
granting,
You're not
right,
paying
that all that
attention.
stuff happened. Look, I'm granting that all that stuff happened, right? He's claiming, right, just because four men claim that a God did it, therefore we've come to the conclusion.
And you say, how does it point to a God? And I say, they say it points to, they got it from God. Doesn't that answer your question?
No, because that's a claim that needs to be
It,
justified.
Get him, Yuri.
claim or not, it answers your question, right?
He's asking you
Well,
for
it,
an
it
argument.
has nothing. I don't see how it necessitates.
Claim
Look,
or
I
not,
don't see.
it answers your question, right?
Sorry. I don't. Sorry. Right? How it necessitates me or anyone having an answer or not having an answer. The whole point of this is to show how reasoning is fallacious, right?
Yeah,
Because
you can't make that
like I did
argument
with,
because you don't know what it means,
I'm not the one making
right?
a claim, right? You're the one making the claim that the best explanation is a God, and I'm trying to
Yuri,
see
did you
what
Yuri
evidence do you have. Well,
Yuri,
what?
you asked me how does what happened point to a God, and I just told you all
Yeah.
all four of them say they got their information from God. That's how it points to a God. Not that they
What if four?
attribute. Hold on. Not that they attribute their information to a pink unicorn, and then I say that's God or it's God. No, they say they got it from God. Jesus said, "I've come to do my Father's work." The prophets say that they were inspired by God. The Bible says all books are written with the inspiration of God. That's how it
Okay.
points to a God.
Okay, so what would that prove then?
Do you get it?
So
Do you get it now?
So what we have?
Hold on.
So
Do
what
you
we,
get it now?
no, I don't. Because
Don't worry
I
about it.
take when you say point to a God, is that God actually exists. Unless you're
No, that's a separate
equivocating,
issue.
trying to make
That's
some
a
sort of
separate.
semantical game, then that's
That's
perfectly
a
fine.
separate issue. You didn't ask me how does it prove God exists. You said how does it point to a God, and I answered
Yeah,
that.
how does it point to a God granting that God exists?
Oh,
That's what
okay.
the
You didn't
statement implies.
ask. No.
Unless
It's
you're
two
just a
different
complete
issues.
unless you're just a complete ignoramus, right? And you don't have an education on what words mean, right? Then I could see how you could fall trap to not understanding what I'm talking about. But I think everyone in the room here understands that when I say how does it point to God, is that we're granting that some satious being exists, right? And that we're trying to see
Oh,
what
so if you're
evidence you have and what
granting,
prediction the hypothesis makes that answers the question, right, to actually proving his existence. I think everyone here understands that, but
you're
you.
done. You're done, sir.
Yeah, and that's how it's done, boys.
So, as usual, Concrete is asked for an argument, doesn't give one. Pack it up, boys. Time to go home and bang your wives.
It's hard talking to children, man.
Yeah,
Anyway,
but Concrete, if you just stop trying to turn this into a fucking Def Jam comedy routine every time you fucking talk.
it's hard talking to children.
The fucking conversation, the conversation would actually flow, right? If you listen to it, see, you're doing it now. But see, this is what I mean. Just turn it off for fuck. No, just don't stop. Listen, I know you like saying my name, buddy.
You're right. You're right, Ray. You're right, Ray.
Yeah, I am right. But that's just
Concrete,
fucking
like
talk to people.
debate aside, do you really believe that shit? Like the other night you were talking about there was a airplane crash and a baby survived, and that was God that like performed a miracle and made the baby survive. Do you really believe that?
I want to know how do you hand wave every single personal testimony in life, in the history of life? They're just not smart. They're just liars and mistakes.
Concrete, it's me, your best friend again. We can answer that.
No,
right? Anecdotal evidence is usually.
I was talking to Godless.
Well, why can't
That's
you?
cool. It's a public.
The respect of assuming that you don't actually believe that baby plane crash thing. Do you? I want to hear.
The baby plane crash thing is a fact. You can Google it.
No one
No,
cares.
but
No
do you
one's
really
disputing
think that
it.
was like
Google it.
God like broke the laws of
you
nature
can-
to save this baby? Do you really believe
You
that?
can you can Google it. What are
No
you
one's
talking
denying.
about?
Look. Sorry, no one's denying that happened, right? We're just
You can
asking you
look it
whether or not you believe.
up.
We're just
When
asking
you
you, right? And I'm gonna
assess
use the
it,
phrase again that points to a God existing.
you can say whatever you want to say. 99% of the world for thousands of years are going to say, thank you, God. Sorry.
Ad populum. Thank
Sorry.
you. Bye.
Appealing to look, 99% of the world.
99% of the world for
Look,
all
for the
of
majority,
humanity.
for most of humanity, 99% of the world believe the Earth was flat. So we believe the Earth is flat.
Yeah, we already debunked that.
Get him.
So Jesus has been debunked too.
You can hate God all you
How
want.
come you won't say it,
It's
though?
a waste
How
of
come you
time.
won't say it? How come you
Say
just
what?
say it? Yes,
Say
yes,
what?
I believe that Yahweh broke the laws of physics in order to save this baby on this plane. Say it.
I mean, if you heard my conversation, then you already know what I believe. And of course, I believe
I
God
want to hear you
saved the
say it.
baby. God saved the baby. Anybody who watches it, what do you think the baby thinks? Hold on. It's so funny. What do you think that baby thinks when they grow up? They're gonna say, "Man, that was nothing."
That's
That
the
was
first real
simple.
laugh he's got.
That was
Concrete.
simple. The baby's gonna. You think the baby's gonna say, "Hold on"? Who do you think? Who do you think?
Listen to what I'm about to say.
Who do you think's fucking opinion is more important, the baby's or yours?
So let me answer that question.
Who do you think's opinion is more important?
Calm down.
Just ask
Orthogonal
it,
is whether or
Concrete.
not
Don't
God
ask it
exists.
5 more
Everybody,
times.
everybody
I
relax.
want an answer
Listen,
to my question, please.
He's going to answer.
I am.
Shut up.
Godless. Who do you think's opinion is more important, yours or the baby's?
I don't think that people's opinions are relevant to what's actually true, and I don't think that that's actually true.
Oh, okay. So when the baby wakes up to an adult and realizes what she's been through, she's gonna look at it and say, "That was nothing. That was just a little bit of physics. mixed with a little biology, mixed with a little bit of aerodynamics,
Concrete, please.
mixed with a little bit of thermonuclear.
This is painful.
It
You're
is
hurting me.
painful. Listen to idiots
Listen to
talk
me.
about
No,
miracles
look.
as if they're
Concrete.
regular events.
Concrete. Listen, okay? I'm gonna level. Look, nobody is discounting the fact that it's, we can say colloquially a
I was
miracle,
gonna say
right?
a miracle.
The fact that baby survived is, hold on, the fact that the baby survived is, in terms of probability, very impressive. However, the opinion of the baby, right, that it may have been a miracle or perhaps God's hand at work, does not prove that it was God's hand at work. So you can't use that as evidence for the existence of a Christian
God.
God.
Really did save that baby.
Hold on.
That's an evil act. That's an evil act because look, you believe if that baby had just died, it would go to heaven, right? And now evil God fucking saved that baby, and now statistically, it's not going to grow up to be the correct denomination of Christianity. It's going to end up in hell. If God had just let the fucking laws of nature be, then that baby would be in heaven right now. But now, because of evil God saving it, most likely it's going to be tormented in fire for eternity.
All right, so back to what Pogan was saying.
The problem is
Pogan, we don't work with proofs. We work with probability. I'll get you. How do you know I'm not going to talk
Wait,
about
I
that?
don't.
Just
How,
relax.
You were so adamant about talking to God.
I want to
understand.
deal.
Hold
Okay, back to
answer to my
I want to deal with Andrikis. You're such a troll.
You are
Sitting in the back of the room.
I'm asking you a
Hold on,
clarification.
Pogan.
Yeah.
You're not in control of the room,
Pogan,
Concrete, no matter how much you
Pogan.
think you are.
Stop trolling, Andrikis. Pogan, go back to your fucking banjo, you Grammy award-winning fucking country singer. Anyway.
Wait, is that a
you
dig?
mother
Me
sucker?
being-
You mother sucker?
What?
No, it's actually a fact.
Can you answer my
Andrikis is a Grammy award-winning country guy.
Not a country
All right,
guy,
back to you,
but thank you.
Pogan. No problem. Yeah, you're a motherfucking troll. But anyway, Pogan. Shit. Pogan, we don't deal with proofs. We deal with probability. So when you're asking for proof, that is, what would you call that program? A non-starter? Or a non-starter.
I don't understand the question.
Don't speak about proof, Pogan. You know better. Okay?
I just say one thing.
Okay?
Why are we engaging
Pogan,
with
don't talk
concrete?
about proof.
Why are you?
Hey, Concrete, let's
already
compare
admitted
events. Let's compare events, Concrete. So one baby gets saved on a plane, right? One baby gets saved on a plane, and 85,000 children starve to death in Yemen. Why would you consider any of those acts miracles or not miracles?
All right, miracles have positive outcomes, number one.
Yeah, 85,000 children starving in Yemen is not a very positive outcome.
So it's not a miracle.
Yeah, so why would God act on the fate of one baby and let 85,000 children starve to death?
I don't know.
Yeah, exactly.
But guess what happens to the 85,000 babies when they die? They go to heaven.
Oh, back to Godless's point.
Babies are winning.
So Concrete, I'd like to actually say what I wanted to say without
Pogan, are you gonna talk about proofs or are you gonna talk about probability?
Why are you speaking over me? Who lets
That's
this
your question.
look? Once again, you were dealing initially with Yuri, right? And Yuri wasn't dealing with conjecture, right? He was dealing with an argument that you were able to provide for the existence of the Christian God. Now, I haven't heard the argument, but that's fine. We can move on from that for a little bit. We're now dealing with things that could, in theory, right, potentially lead credence to the existence of the Christian God. But the problem is these miracles, as you call them, just as easily, right, lead credence to alternate hypotheses and alternate explanations, such as it just being probabilistic that people would die rather than survive in a horrific, right? Sure, it's unlikely, but that doesn't definitively prove the existence of a Christian God. And if you want to say, we're just dealing with probability here, we're not dealing with certainty, right? If that's what you want to say, you can make an inductive argument, but you have to realize that, again, you're dealing with events and the explanations that could just as easily be used for another hypothesis. Why is a miracle proving the existence of the Christian rather than the existence of Allah or the flying spaghetti monster? Or perhaps just me whipping my dick out and thus causing a plane crash through psychic... You realize what I'm saying here? It doesn't prove anything.
It's so simple, Pogan. It's not a big deal, right?
Hold on, Micolash wanted to... No, look, you've been talking for a while.
I'm going to answer your question, Pogeezy.
Don't call me that.
Pogeezy Maneezy?
I can't
call
hear
you.
Micolash.
It's better than calling you douchebag, right?
There's a bigger issue than being expected on alternate hypotheses. A bigger problem is that those events aren't even the slightest bit of evidence for the God hypothesis because they're not expected on the God hypothesis.
Yeah.
Please go away. Please go away. I'm going to answer your question, Pogan.
Right.
Because that was a waste of time.
No,
Go away, because that was a waste of...
Look, I didn't want to go down that road.
Tell that baby
look,
that
I didn't want to... Look, sorry. Look, I didn't want to go down that road when we originally had the conversation, right? Because when we originally had the conversation, I didn't want to go directly into the predictions the God hypothesis can make.
Wait, hold on. Yuri, one second, guys.
Chill out.
Concrete, I want to ask you a question. Do you understand what Micolash said?
Let me talk to fucking Pogan first.
All right.
Pogan.
I just want to know, did you understand what Micolash said?
Hold on, just relax. We'll get to Micolash.
We'll get to Micolash.
If necessary.
Just move the conversation back to the question that you feel more comfortable
Pogan,
with. Concrete.
Hold on. Pogan. The baby...
What?
He's breaking up now. He's live with Apollo, but no one's checked his mic.
Well, I think I know what he was going to ask, right? He was going to repeat what he said 15 minutes ago, which is we're not dealing with epistemic certainty, we're dealing with probability. But again, even if you make an inductive argument that probabilistically shows the existence of the Christian God, it's just going to go back to, well, why are these events consistent with the God hypothesis and not consistent with an alternate hypothesis, or what Micolash? They're potentially not even consistent with the God hypothesis in the first place.
That's the thing,
I
right?
made a video on this. I made a video on this very thing to help people.
That's another big issue that Concrete wants to claim as on the side as probability, right? But in order for those events to raise the probability of God's existence, they'd actually have to be expected on the God hypothesis.
Right. There's no prediction. Hold on. There's no prediction in the God hypothesis that says, these events would be consistent with said hypothesis. These events can only be attributed to the actions of the Christian God, or I suppose the existence of the Christian God in some capacity. And like I said before,
Micolash,
why is
the
it the
God
case
hypothesis?
Why are you interrupting me?
Jack's here. Hold on. Jack's here, fellas. Look,
Micolash, what is the God hypothesis?
I'd like to just finish really quickly, and then we can move to Jack. Right?
Micolash,
1 second.
Micolash,
I just don't
what is the
understand
God
why
hypothesis?
Holy fuck.
Micolash, what is the God hypothesis?
The hypothesis that there's an all-powerful being, with beliefs and desires.
that has explanatory power.
Okay, so how is the baby surviving inconsistent with not
Hold on, I got this,
evidence for the God hypothesis? Hold on, Micolash is talking. I want to talk to Micolash. You wanted to jump in? Let me talk to him.
You'd actually have to show how it would be expected that babies would be saved on the God hypothesis.
You already made the assertion. Now you have to support your assertions.
You're saying that that's evidence for the God hypothesis, and we're asking you how
You made the assertion, sir. This is the last time, and then we'll move on. You made the assertion.
Yeah, and you're saying that it's evidence for the God hypothesis.
We're done.
Okay.
So, wait, Yuri, 1 second.
Look, hold on, Pogan. No, 1 second.
Socrates. How did you like that one, Socrates? Socrates, how do you like that one, Socrates?
This is a disaster.
Look, concrete,
Socrates,
right?
did I handle Micolash well? Socrates,
Concrete.
you asked me if I understood Micolash. Did that suffice? Did that suffice?
I don't really think so. But
Did he answer my question?
Hold on. There's more room to discuss it, though. Right?
Did he answer my question?
What's your question again?
It was, how does he support his assertion that the baby dying or not dying in the plane crash doesn't provide evidence for the God hypothesis?
Because they're not expecting the God hypothesis.
Yeah, he did answer that, right? Because the reason I would say that's an answer is because if you're going to have a God hypothesis, it's going to be the case that it's going to have some sort of predictions, right? But as far as I know, nothing about being an all-powerful deity talks about this baby thing, right? So it doesn't seem like it's not a predictive outcome of the hypothesis.
Yeah, in order for it to be evidence for the God hypothesis, you'd have to show that it's actually expected on the God hypothesis.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because the
So
reason why that's also the case is because an omnipotent God doesn't have to create a universe. He didn't have to save a baby. And we don't even have access to its intentional state to even derive what prediction or what that God would want for the state of affairs of this world, modally speaking.
So, Concrete's criticism of Micolash, from what I understood before we got into this, was that he was making the assertion that it wasn't consistent with the God hypothesis. But that assertion is totally justifiable in virtue of the God hypothesis providing explanatory power for these events, right? If it fails to account for them or fails to incorporate them, then Micolash stating, look, it's inconsistent with the God is a totally legitimate statement to make, right? Because surely an omnipotent, omniscient God would account for these events if they had explanatory power, right? If there were predictions that could be.
No, the point is they don't even seem inconsistent with the God hypothesis, right? He's saying that it's expected that babies would be saved, right? Why shouldn't we think the opposite, right?
Right.
He can't actually
Right.
show that these are expected on the God hypothesis, right? And so if he can't show that, then there's no reason to believe that it's evidence for the God hypothesis.
That's how it's done, boys. That's it right there.
Guys, be nice to Concrete.
So Concrete, we're not trying to engage in gotcha games, right? We're genuinely waiting for the connection that you said existed. The connection being the fact that this baby's life was spared from the plane crash is somehow proof of. There's presumably some sort of argument or some piece of evidence that would show that to be the case. If not conclusively, at least probably. And you don't seem able to provide that beyond saying, well, this is consistent with God's actions. But like Micolash said, it's just as consistent with other explanations and other hypotheses. You know, why does it have to be the Christian God? I could be a fucking superhero who saved the baby by thinking about it. That's consistent.
Exactly. Yeah, and by the way, Concrete, I DM'd you that video because you seem to have this problem. I DM'd you that video that I made regarding this very issue. It's very well detailed, tons of likes, tons of comments talking about how that video helped them to understand the God hypothesis a lot better. So if you would like to check that video out and considering subscribing and liking the video and giving it a watch, that would be great. And we shouldn't run into these issues anymore.
somebody's selling their shit.
What?
All right, back to the God hypothesis.
Oh boy.
All right, so you saying the God hypothesis doesn't have predictive powers?
Just
you
to
establish,
confirm.
yet you assert that the baby is not evidence for the God hypothesis. How do you
You were here for the last 15 minutes where we explained, like you were present.
No, I wasn't. I had work to do. Sorry, buddy. I had to handle some business.
Micolash,
So, Micolash, you said two things. Hold on, no, don't explain. You said, I want you to just answer this question. You said that the baby dying is not, or the baby surviving is not evidence for the God hypothesis. How does that work? What is your proof for that? What is your argument?
Because it's not expected on the God hypothesis.
What would be expected under the God hypothesis?
That's a good question. Maybe you should figure that out.
So you don't know what's expected for the God hypothesis?
Yeah, to my knowledge, it doesn't seem like anything could be inconsistent with the God hypothesis, and so it seems unfalsifiable. And if it's unfalsifiable, then there's no evidence for or against the hypothesis.
Oh, so there's no evidence. So if there's nothing that's inconsistent with the God hypothesis, there's no evidence for it or evidence against it?
Because falsification is linked to verification. In order for you to falsify X, you would have to show what would verify X. I talk about this in 3 minutes into my video.
Oh, we're not watching your video, Yuri.
Concrete.
Go, Micolash. Hold on, Micolash. I need him to clarify some things, Soccer, before you jump in and try to white knight for him. All right,
No, I was going to
Micolash.
explain something. But yeah, I got you.
No, you're good. All right, Micolash. So, is it the case that the baby is not evidence for the God hypothesis? Yes or no?
I don't see how it could be if nothing's inconsistent with the God hypothesis.
So if nothing's inconsistent, that means anything could be evidence for the God hypothesis.
If anything's evidence for the God hypothesis, then that just means that nothing is evidence for the God hypothesis.
Exactly.
How is that the case? What is the logical argument for that?
Because any state of affairs is consistent with the existence of a God, and so nothing actually raises or lowers the probability of God existing.
Can I give an example?
Well, if God is the creator of all things, then wouldn't that stand to reason that He is responsible for all things in one or another way,
Well,
and can
creating all
choose to
things is just
interact,
it's just a
and can choose to
creating all
interact or not,
things.
and can choose to
Yeah, creating all
interact,
things is
and
not
can choose to
doesn't have any
interact, and
explanatory
can
power either.
choose to interact or not interact with His creation as He so
Well, that's
fits.
just pushing it back further because we haven't showed how
Wait, Yuri.
creating
Hold
anything or creating all things
on,
has
I'm trying to deal with
explanatory power.
Micolash right now. I'm trying to deal with Micolash right now.
Micolash is going to say the same thing. You get
Micolash.
him, Micolash. Come on, you got it.
So
If he can choose to create or not create, then creation isn't actually evidence for the God hypothesis.
That's what I'm saying. Damn right.
How is creation
Likely.
not evidence for the God? This is crazy. How is that not evidence?
Because God could have not created.
So how is it not evidence?
Because you haven't showed how omnipotent, how creating everything it has explanatory power. You'd have to show that first.
As expected on the hypothesis that God doesn't, right? So it doesn't actually raise the probability that God exists, that there's a universe, right? Because God could exist and not created. Right? So that's a big problem for you, right?
Yeah. Yeah, me and Jack have talked. Actually, all of the cow talkers we have talked extensively about this.
So did you see the definition that came up for evidence? The available body of facts or information indicating whether a belief or proposition is true or valid.
Yeah, and what I take evidence to what is expected on a hypothesis, right? That's in virtue of it being expected on a hypothesis. It counts as evidence.
So this is your own proprietary definition for evidence, because it's not that doesn't sound in alignment with the definition that came up in the. What would be expected for a given? So everything that is not expected within a given hypothesis is not evidence. Not evidence for the hypothesis, but it is evidence of something.
Right.
If you had a hypothesis and you wanted to test the hypothesis, right? You'd look for what is expected on the hypothesis. Right?
So we're changing the definition for evidence. Is that what's happening right now?
No, we're not. No, we haven't. No, look, dumbass. Look,
yes,
dumbass. Look,
Yuri.
dumbass. Dumbass.
Calm down,
Yuri. Hypothesis is a question
down,
of highly educated motherfucking guess, right? And so if we have a guess, right, and we want to verify that proposition, we don't just throw out hypothesis. So in order for us to verify the goddamn proposition, we would, right?
Yeah, that's a real asshole right there. Anyway, Micolash. Yeah. So how is the baby not evidence for the God hypothesis?
Look, I have to go in a minute, but look, if you wanted to test the hypothesis, right, you'd look for observations.
How is the baby not evidence for the God hypothesis?
I have to go. Let me finish. You can talk to Jack if you want, if he's there. But let me just finish with this.
Thank you.
If you want
to. Now, to you, Socrates, what do you want to talk about?
Wait, let Micolash finish.
That were inconsistent with a hypothesis, right? That's actually how you'd have evidence for or against the hypothesis.
Yeah, so how is the baby not evidence for the God hypothesis?
Because you'd actually have to show that it was expected on the God hypothesis, and that's my last point.
So God saving babies is definitely expected on the God hypothesis. How is the baby not expected? Okay, thank you. Socrates?
I mean,
I want to point out something. Wait,
the counter question is...
Hold on. I want to point out that in the God hypothesis, the baby, being saved could be evidence, but then also conversely, the baby not being saved could also be evidence of God's will, right? You can't say that, well, miracles are only good things, because by definition, anything that God does is good, right?
No. Miracles are defined as positive outcomes.
Right, but
We're not talking about God's
hold on.
actions.
Sodom and Gomorrah was a miracle, right? That God
No, it's
did.
not a miracle. It's an act of God.
Okay, so you're saying miracle. All right, doesn't matter. The baby not being saved, it could have been the case that it was an evil baby or whatever, right? Baby not being saved versus the baby being saved would both be evidence for God. And as such, how do you determine which one of these propositions is the evidence when they're both equally likely to be evidences for God?
Yeah, that's why it's a cumulative argument. We don't just take evidence. We don't just take one individual piece of evidence and say, yes, that proves God. We take it's a cumulative argument. It's a cumulative argument.
Wait,
You're missing the
So
point.
yeah, it's still evidence for
No,
God.
Concrete,
Right?
you're missing the fucking point. You're missing the entire point of Socrates' argument.
The point is that both it and its opposite can count as evidence for the God hypothesis.
A baby dying is evidence for God?
Yeah.
How so?
How, in virtue of what is the baby living versus the baby dying evidence for God?
No, it's not the baby living or the baby dying. It's the baby being saved during having an improbable rescue from a plane crash.
Mm-hmm.
That's the evidence for God.
Right, but the opposite can also be said to be evidence.
No. Yeah, it could be, but we're not looking at that right now.
So if it
the
could
baby
be,
dying,
in virtue of what?
because no one says that death is evidence for God.
Yeah, they do when people like say, "Spy my enemies, God." There you go. Anything that God does can be seen as evidence.
In that case, if you were making a concerted, if you had a definitive effort to have your enemies spited, then yes. Once your enemies are spited, that would be evidence for God because you called on God for that to happen.
Well, now we've changed it, right? Now we're talking.
No, you're trying to say that death is an indicator of God or evidence for the existence of God, and I'm saying miracles is an existence for evidence for the existence of God. Miracles, not just simply life versus death.
So now we're going back to Micolash's earlier question, which was, in virtue of what does the baby being saved show evidence for God versus the opposite?
By virtue that the baby, by all accounts, should have been dead.
Okay, so improbable things are what you're saying prove God.
Question.
Evidence.
What observation?
I'm sorry, but I just failed to grasp how improbability is somehow proof of God.
What is the question, Micolash?
It's irrational.
Sorry.
We could ask him what observation would be inconsistent with the God hypothesis.
Hold on. Let's talk about Professor Alex. What were you going to say? I just
I like that, Professor. But I was going to say, right, like just similar to what they're trying to point out to you, right? Let me ask this, right? For every miracle that doesn't happen, would you say that's evidence that God doesn't exist?
No.
No. Right. So why is it that when a miracle does happen, that is evidence that God exists?
Because it's improbable and it's positive.
So why isn't the counter proposal evidence for the contrary?
Because we have I don't know. We just don't consider it as evidence for the existence of God. We just it's a neutral.
That's what they're trying to point out with regards to your thesis being unfalsifiable.
Yeah, that's fine.
Even if we present you with all the counter evidence, right, you're still refusing to accept that would be evidence against your theory.
What's a counter to a miracle? What's
something
a counter to a miracle?
I assume something commonplace, right? Like you're saying that, like, let's say we've got an airplane, right, with 10 babies on board, and it's a miracle that one of them survives. The counter would be the 9 babies that didn't.
No. That's a normal. Oh shit! I gotta go to work.
Okay.
All right, have fun, Concrete.
What confuses me even more about this whole improbability thing is that it's a very it's mostly based on one's opinion on what improbability is, right? Because a lot of people think that certain things are highly improbable, but when you look at the numbers, considering how many people, for example, are on Earth, you think, maybe it's not that improbable at all. I mean, it's from a very certain perspective. So I mean, to say that improbability somehow proves something, like it proves God, it just sounds silly to me.
I think I want to go that route because we can talk about probabilities in less opinionated ways, but you'd have to show that whenever there's like a good Christian baby, improbable chance at surviving, the God hypothesis would kick in and say, well, that baby's going to survive, right? If that's what's supposed to be generated, but it's not generated, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like that's what he wants to say, that this is proof, but if this is proof, then that would generate an expectation that other similar situations, they would survive.
Yeah. Well, I just find it. I still find it all why these kind of miracles would exist if there are much more horrifying examples of the exact opposite.
Right.
Well, that's the thing. If you build in goodness into the God hypothesis, then that would generate a problem of evil, right? And there's plenty of evidence. Then there would be plenty of evidence against the God hypothesis.
Yeah. I mean, you can say like, "Oh, God saved this baby," but what about the other 10 babies? Are they not innocent as well?
Yeah.
Right? Because they're not. A lot of Christians still believe, of course, that like from a certain age you go to heaven regardless because you are unable to perceive something. So I mean, like, yeah, that one baby survived, but what about the other 9 babies? Why did they have to die? You know, so.
Well, and if you get certain types of Christians, they believe that, God does predetermine and does destine stuff. So that's just part of what God has
Yeah,
done.
but then you can poke holes in pretty much a lot of different things,
Right.
Such as the fall of humanity, for example. That pretty much means that God intended humanity to fall. Otherwise, he wouldn't have. Otherwise, he
Sure.
would have put something in measure to prevent that, for example. So he basically created something knowing it was flawless
Right.
and knowing it would cause massive suffering amongst billions of living souls. So,
Right.
I mean, and by that, I mean, I don't think anyone can defend it as a normal, all good God. You know.
Well, the particularly headstrong ones would just say, "Well, God can do whatever He wants, and who are you to question that?" And of course that flies in the face of the personal, loving God.
Yeah,
narrative.
because it's supposed to be a personal love and causing causing suffrage, knowing full well will happen.
Yeah, it turns into a kid with it turns into a kid with an ant farm rather than a loving God.
Yeah.
So proof for God versus regular events. I don't think the opposite of a miracle is a regular event. I think you would have to go to something diabolical like the Holocaust, which is an extraordinary tragedy, as opposed to an extraordinary positive.
Well, what about,
Didn't
for
you have to
example,
go to work?
wait, sorry, what about, for example, what about,
I got it like that, bro.
no, what about, let's say that there are 10 babies on board and only 1 survives and the other 9 die, right? Wouldn't that be a lot? Like when you measure, like you're talking about saving one person being alive versus 9 dead. Like when you scale that's quite a hefty scale on the dead side, if you know what I mean, right?
Yeah, but that's a different argument.
I mean,
I want to come back to it. Oh, sorry, go on.
No, I don't really see how that's so much of a different argument. It's somewhat the same what other people said, but
You're just talking about
whatever.
death, and that has nothing to do with evidence for God or against.
Well, I mean,
Unless
we're
you're saying-
talking about the airplane example, and again, when you talk about when only 1 baby survives in that airplane, you're talking about possibly over 120 people dead in that same airplane, right? That's how the analogy. So if it's a realistic analogy, that's how it should work.
Yeah, and I say, so what?
Right. Well, what I'm saying is that the scales differ heavily. You're talking about one baby being saved versus possible other 10 babies and maybe over 200 other people dead.
So what?
I'm also kind of curious if you've ever really taken the time to think about probabilities.
Probabilities of what?
of anything.
you're saying if something's unlikely, then that means that it's a miracle, right?
It depends the connotation, right? And
Well, what connotation makes it a miracle?
positive.
So anything positive.
Concrete.
Unlikely.
All right, so like
And
let's
contrary.
do you play poker? Do you play poker?
Hold on. And contrary to what you would expect under a natural worldview, right?
Okay,
Under a natural.
do you play?
Hold on. I just want to flesh it out a little bit more. Under a natural worldview, you would believe that when a plane crashes and 99% of the people die, you would have expected all the people to die under a natural worldview, right?
Wait, why would you expect that? Have you ever
No,
played
Because
poker?
99% died.
If you expect 99% of the people to die, right,
Is there
and
any
1%
reason for
of
you
the
to
people
expect
live,
anyone
that
to live?
says
Is there
who?
any reason for you to expect? Is there any reason for you to expect the 1%?
All right, how about this?
Depends-
If you get
no,
shot
wait.
in the head, do you expect to live?
No.
Okay, 1 out of 10 people die or live from a headshot.
Miracle. My case
It's
in
1
point.
out of 10. It's a 10% chance.
Miracle.
The same
My
is
case in
true.
point.
The same is true of shooting animals in the head. So if you shoot an animal in the head and 1 out of 10 lives, that's a miracle.
Yeah, because you need animals to procreate, right?
Okay,
So
what if I'm playing poker, right? And I have a royal flush. Is that a miracle?
Is that in the connotation that we're talking about?
No,
Is that
'cause you're
Let's say
is that equivalent?
you might play cards a lot and only see 1 royal flush in your entire life.
Yeah, I went down this with somebody else a long time, a couple of weeks ago or whatever, a couple of days ago. Don't want to go down it again. It's not equivalent.
And did you understand it?
No, I'm stupid. It's not equivalent.
The funny
Well,
thing
so
is,
No, it's not. It's not about it being equivalent. I'm just talking about what the probabilities are, right?
Do you think probability is that complicated of a subject?
Yeah,
Well,
they
I mean,
have like whole books and courses devoted
Yeah. So
to understanding.
once you read through an introductory book on statistics or probability, do you think there'll be much that you don't understand about that simple concept?
Yes.
the funny thing is that Concrete was saying the definition of evidence was proprietary, but 5 minutes later he's using my definition.
Right.
How am I using your definition?
Because you were talking about what was expected on the naturalistic hypothesis.
Yeah. So did you expect the baby to die under the naturalistic hypothesis?
That's exactly how I defined evidence is what's expected on a hypothesis.
No.
right?
Did you expect the baby to live under your naturalistic hypothesis?
Lo and behold, you use the same fucking definition that I'm using.
Okay. Did you expect the baby to live under the naturalistic hypothesis? Yes.
Is what's expected on hypothesis evidence for that hypothesis?
No. My question is, did you expect the baby to live under your worldview? Yes or no?
My
All
question.
right. So this is easy to solve. You could just ask a few questions about the baby, right?
No, you can't because you're not there to give the accurate answers. We weren't there to give the
Well,
accurate
you're
answers.
not
You can
there
ask
to
the
give the
questions.
accurate answers.
Yeah. So there's no point in asking the questions.
Right, which means that you don't know whether or not it was expected naturally for the baby to die. Here, let me ask a few questions. Did the baby have its head severed?
The baby lives, sir.
Okay, but I'm asking if the baby had its head severed, because if the baby had its head severed, I'd expect it to die.
The baby was in a plane crash where everyone else died. Would you not expect it to die?
I'm asking you. I'm asking you what happened to the baby, right? I'm not asking.
Would you not expect it to die in that scenario?
If by chance the plane lands and there's no trauma to any of the baby's physical, like its vital organs, then yes, I would expect the baby to live.
The plane didn't land. It crashed. Everyone else on board died. Did you expect the baby to live?
So
did you expect the baby to live? Did you expect the baby to live?
I'm asking a few. All right, look, I'm just going to ask a few preliminary. Okay, look, Look,
Say
just
no,
listen.
dude. It's a simple just say
Did you
no. It's
expect
fine.
the baby to
Yes,
live?
I expect the baby to live.
Okay, great.
I'm
You're
almost
ridiculous
certain.
now.
I'm
You're
almost
ridiculous
certain
now.
that under the circumstances, and if I was there and I watched with the camera, right, or I was, who knows? Let's say I was there and I lived as well, and I watched what happened to the baby. I'm pretty sure I would say I expect that baby to live.
You are ridiculous right now, and I can't go
Why
any
is that
further with-
ridiculous?
It's
Say you're in a car
obviously-
crash, right?
It's obviously no point in continuing with you because you're ridiculous, and you'll say,
Well, you're clearly not listening to me.
"Yeah, I did. I heard." That's how I know you're
All
ridiculous.
right,
I
was
heard
the
everything you
baby's
said.
head severed? Were vital organs punctured?
You
Was
would-
there
you-
anything
you-
that happened to the baby during the crash that would suggest that the baby ought to die? The answer is
baby
no,
was-
right?
the baby- the
Nothing
baby-
happened to the baby in the
was
crash
in a plane
that would.
that crashed.
So what?
That's in and of itself.
All right. Do you
When
have
99% of people died.
any sort of education on physics, on the way things move and the way
shit.
that
Oh shit! So now what you're going to tell me is that someone can take all the data from that plane and
Right.
create a simulation of
Yep.
that plane crash
Mhm.
and give us a mathematical explanation as to how the baby survived.
Yeah, it's called a black box.
I can say
retard.
Is that what
I
you're
could
saying?
say that
You fucking moron.
Is that
I
what
could
you're
say
saying?
that every time we've ever looked at these supposed miracles and tried to simulate what happened, yes, the simulation shows that that's exactly what would be expected to happen through nature.
Okay, great. I
Right?
can't wait for you
If
to.
the
I can't
baby's
wait for
if
you
the
to
baby's
build it.
head popped off and the baby's head started talking and said, "Hey, put me back on my body and I'll live," and then someone put the baby's head on the baby's body and it like continued to live as a normal baby, I would say that's a miracle because that doesn't make sense.
Well,
through
a miracle
nature.
is also, by
Right, but
definition, also just an extraordinary event.
If a whole bunch of metal is crumpling around this space, right, and this space manages to hit the ground comfortably without doing any sort of damage to the baby that's seated in whatever position the baby's in, and the baby doesn't undergo any sort of physical trauma to its vital organs, I would expect that baby to live. And lo and behold, that's almost certainly what fucking happened.
Let's go back to the word
are an
miracle
idiot,
itself, Concrete. The word miracle itself, by definition, just means an extraordinary event. It does not necessarily entail the involvement of a quote-unquote deity or supernatural force. It could just be an extraordinary event, an unusual event.
I know.
So calling a baby surviving a plane crash a miracle is technically fine because it is extraordinary, but it does not point to a god. It does not point
Well,
to
it doesn't
supernatural.
suggest that something supernatural happened.
That's
You'd
what
have to
I'm saying. That's what I'm saying.
You'd actually have to have evidence that something supernatural happened. The
It-
baby's head being severed and being put back on the baby and the baby living, that's supernatural.
Sure,
right?
and it is an extraordinary event because if everybody died in the plane, the baby lived. I mean, that's an odds. Just by pure percentage, it's an extraordinary event, but it does not entail supernatural involvement.
Now,
Baby was Hitler.
Now you see why now you see why the atheist community is so small, because you have to do that type of mental gymnastics in order to maintain
It's
your
not
worldview.
mental gymnastics.
No,
it's
look
called
up the
critical
definition of
thinking.
Mental gymnastics. Sorry.
Look up the definition of miracle. You want me to read it to you? Want me to read it to you?
You guys. So the opposite is we're mentally lazy, right? We're big fat dummies.
You
And
are
guys
clearly
are
mentally
like-
lazy because you
you
can't
guys-
tell me
you
what
guys
happened to
are
the baby that
mental-
would kill it.
You guys are mental gymnasts, Olympic gymnasts. You can do backflips, somersaults. You can do pirouettes. You can do everything that a triple gold medalist can do. Congratulations.
According to
Concrete
you,
Plush just needs
if
to
a
be
human
ignored.
gets shot
Just
in the
ignore it.
head and lives, it's a miracle. Even though it's expected to happen 10% of the time based off of natural phenomenon, right? Just based off of nature, nothing magical has to happen. Shot in the head, 10% chance to live. To you, that's
so
a miracle.
nature caused that 10%, or is that just a statistical analysis?
That's a natural
No,
occurrence.
Guys,
10% of people will live
simple
to
line of
that
inquiry.
chapter.
This isn't going
Yeah.
to be a
So
fruitful line of inquiry.
So you look at the way that gunshots work,
It's not a
right?
fruitful line of inquiry.
They always
This is not
go in
gonna,
a
like, work
straight
on 'em.
line. Well, I mean, just think about it. Take a moment to actually think
Hold
about
on.
it. Did
He
anything
won't. He
happen
won't,
to the
bro. He
baby
won't. He
that
won't, Czar.
You
was
didn't tell me.
supernatural,
He won't, Czar.
or
He
was
won't.
it just he's
Yeah,
what?
He won't. He will not entertain that idea.
Yeah,
He will
so-
only entertain
what
supernatural.
idea? Why
That is an
Don't let
extraordinary
anyone-
event without
don't
supernatural.
let
But he
anyone-
can't
If a
rule
monkey-
out that
I'll
it
speak for
happened
myself.
naturally, and every time anyone's ever checked, it looks like it happened naturally.
Right.
So
Hey,
what?
Concrete. If a monkey falls from a tree, right, and that monkey falls from the tree and it cracks its head on the ground, but for some reason that monkey survives, then what? All the odds point to the monkey dying, but for some reason the monkey survived that fall from the tree. Therefore, what?
And thank you.
Oh, fuck.
That's that.
He didn't even have an answer for the God hypothesis, man. It's just
You
ridiculous.
already asked and answered that stupid ass question.
No, you didn't, buddy.
Well, he wants to
Animals
say.
are miracles in our lives.
Oh, yeah,
What?
Concrete,
Animals
you're roboting.
surviving are miracles too. You remember when the guy said, "If I shoot a deer,"
Well,
yeah, fucking
I don't know if I can understand Concrete because he's roboting.
stupid ass example.
you're breaking. You're roboting, buddy.
What did you say, Socrates?
You're roboting. I don't think we can hear you or understand you.
Yeah, your connection's going all funky.
All I heard was God shoots deer, but I couldn't make heads or tails.
No, he was saying that animals can fall under the miracle category too. But again, miracle by definition can also mean a purely extraordinary event, not necessarily by default supernatural involvement. So, if you're gonna use that word, you need to say a miracle by God's hand or something like that. Because a miracle, I would be willing to use that word just to describe an extraordinary event, not necessarily a God active event. But he means when he says miracle, he means God did something by default. That's the usage that he means.
You guys are mental gymnasts.